Stevie is a community resiliency and brand galvanizer offering content strategy, education, and inspiration to wine and hospitality brands. Our three key takeaways for this episode on the state of wine writing and how strategic writing can really inform a winery's marketing strategy are number one, the power of strong writing as the foundation for a winery's marketing plan. Number two, what is the state of wine writing today in the US? What does it look like in 2025? And then the future of wine writing. What do we think is on the horizon for our industry as it relates to writing?
Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, your host, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the US market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests in every episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned from the episode. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us this week to learn more about the US market.
Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Stevie Stacionis to the Italian Wine Podcast. Yes, Stevie Kim is another Stevie out there. Stevie is a community resiliency and brand galvanizer offering content strategy, education, and inspiration to wine and hospitality brands. Stevie and her husband own the Michelin-recommended MAMA Oakland restaurant, and they founded, operated, and successfully sold 2 nationally acclaimed Bay Area wine shops and bars. Stevie also co-founded the nonprofit Bâtonnage Forum for women in wine. Stevie also writes the Resilient Wine Substack, which advocates for a more inclusive, pragmatic, and holistic course forward for the wine industry at large. And she's the author of a forthcoming memoir and manifesto about how drinking wine can save the world. I, for one, can't wait to read that, Stevie. How's the memoir coming?
Oh my God. Worst question for you to ask.
Let's get it out of the way as we start.
I think it's part of the process. I think every writer that I've spoken to that's like working on a book or that's finished a book is like, oh, it's so like it's never going to happen. It's all just like floundering, messy, and chaotic. So I'm trying to embrace that. I feel real convicted about it. And most of the time I like what I'm writing, but like piecing it all together is so hard.
I can't even imagine.
Well, it's important. It's a good book.
I can't wait. The world's ready for it. The world is totally ready for it. So Stevie, you and I probably first met when you were still writing about wine back in your New York days, and I was probably year one as a publicist sending you a million pitches. So it's so fun to be back here 10 plus years later. I'm back in New York. You're still in the Bay Area where we got to know each other better. But I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
I'm excited too. Actually, I can't remember if we met originally in New York because I was in New York until 2011 or if it was out here. But it's like crazy how much has happened in between.
I know. So you had over a decade in retail running the Bay Grape wine shops, and now you're back to writing more full time. So talk to us a little bit about what brought you back to wine writing.
Honestly, it still feels very weird and like I'm still trying to validate myself when I say like, I write about wine. It feels so, I don't know, like passive and precious in comparison to like being a retailer, like boots on the ground, operations, like in it every day. So it's interesting, but you know, I've been like thinking back to like where this path started, like the kind of full circle momentum of it. And somewhat like out of the blue, I remembered this line that like, actually, I'm realizing now is like hugely impactful. It was like, it came, 20 years ago from my college writing professor. And I was not on a path to go into writing. I thought I was going to be a psychologist. I was going to be studying youth depression and teenage suicide in Japan. And then long story we won't go into, but it sort of like hard pivoted back into food and ultimately wine and writing. And so my point of all of that is I had this professor and he looked at me on the last day of class and said, if you don't write for a living or use writing as part of your career and your professional life, you will be doing this world a great disservice. And I was like, shut up, boy. Like I'm not going on that path. Like I'm not a writer. I just like for so long, I really like have tried to stifle my like creativity or this notion, this identity of myself as like a truly creative person. I don't know. I thought it was like not a worthy endeavor. I also think that back in the day when I did start to get into this career, as we just talked about, of writing about food and wine and travel, I really like had this sense that like I wasn't legitimate. Like I didn't have enough education and experience to like be worthy of having a say. And
Hmm.
so basically I was like, I need to get more experience. And a huge way that I can do that is by actually working in retail and hospitality and like
Yeah.
truly understanding what I'm talking about. And so,
Right.
there was a lot of pieces that like brought me into ultimately my retail and hospitality career. But definitely part of it was me being like, I need to understand this if I'm going to write about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what you said earlier, like when you started that, like saying you're a wine writer can feel maybe somewhat fluffy or light after 10 years on the floor in retail and restaurants is really interesting
Yeah.
and about our industry in a way too, because I think, wine's a low margin industry that doesn't leave a lot of room for creative minds and thinking all the time, right? It's like we got to just go out and sell that bottle or sell that case. And it's not an industry that always allows for that time to like really dive into strategic writing and brand building and some of these things that are really, what I do for a living also, but that are really important for an industry. And I think we're starting to see that impact of how not correctly investing in brand building is detrimental, right, for an industry and for a brand.
Yeah, completely. Again, as an operator, I understand all too well that like there is not time or money to put
Yeah.
into any of these like creative bits, like the words, the website, the picture, like there's not time for that. So like we are not going to
Right.
focus on it. And yeah, I also know people ask me now, I'm a few months out of selling my shops. And like obviously it's like it's a tricky time and it's a tricky
Mm-hmm.
time to sell businesses. And people are like, to what do you attribute your success? And when I really think about it, there were many, many things. But I think a lot of it came down to like, there was deep brand loyalty and engagement because of the work that we put in to what does boil down to our marketing, our content
Yeah.
strategy, to the writing that we did. And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, it's really important, even though there is not time or
Yeah.
money for it.
Exactly. And true story, I moved to Oakland in 2016 and I remember my mom sharing a New York Times article with me that came out maybe 2 months before I moved that said like Oakland was on the rise and had all this cool stuff happening, including these two really cool wine stores, one of which was Bay Grape. And I remember like bookmarking that article and recognizing your name in the article and going and checking out the shop. And I ended up living around the corner and going in all the time. And again, I found out about it through an article, which comes through PR and marketing. So absolutely, like you said, it's fundamental to success. And that's exactly what, we're going to talk more about in today's conversation, Stevie, and our three key takeaways for this episode on the state of wine writing and how strategic writing can really inform a winery's marketing strategy are number one, the power of strong writing as the foundation for a winery's marketing plan. Number two, what is the state of wine writing today in the US? What does it look like in 2025? And then the future of wine writing. What do we think is on the horizon for our industry as it relates to writing? So to start, let's talk about where we're sitting right now. It's May 9th, 2025. We just got a new pope. Lots of things have been happening in the world that we all are aware of. But in terms of wine writing, Stevie, where do you think our industry sits at this moment?
We're at such an interesting place. And in so many ways, I think we're like, we're in the same place that we were 20 years ago when I was doing this and I left. And in so many ways, we're obviously different. But, it's like 20 years ago, I really felt like wine writing sucked. It didn't speak to me. And most of it, bless all of you other wine writers out there, but like wine writing really still doesn't speak to me. And if it doesn't speak to me, God, like who is it speaking to? I think the difference is at last, like people are talking about that. People are starting to be like, okay, this isn't working. 20 years ago, I also felt like all of marketing of wine was like still, it was rooted in this approach of exclusivity. And again, I still think that it is too rooted in exclusivity, but at last
Right.
people are talking about it. And also, a really pertinent topic today. I think 20 years ago, I was starting to be like, I kind of think that like climate change and sustainability issues are going to make for big problems in the wine industry. Like, is anybody caring about this? And now it's like, this is still a thing, but at last, again, people are finally talking about it. And I'm really glad that we're talking about it right now. I just put up a post on my Substack about how I have this sort of MO of like being willing to bring up these awkward conversations and like talk about things that nobody else is willing to talk about. And so I'm really glad that we're talking about this today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, there's still maybe an accessibility issue that we have as an industry in wine in a lot of aspects. I think writing, for one, like, yes, that's today's conversation, but there's so many other aspects from employment, restaurants, retail, getting in as a brand to a distributor. I mean, there's just so many issues of accessibility. But would you agree that maybe, looking 2025 versus when you were writing back, in the aughts and around 2010, at least platforms have changed? Like, how do you think the impact of, like, let's say having a Substack, which to me, I'm an elder millennial, as I like to call myself. Like, I'm just getting into Substack now. Like, how do you think these platforms have kind of changed the arena for wine writing?
Yeah. Okay. So first, I want to draw a differentiation. When I talk about wine writing, I talk about it in two very different ways. Number one, I talk about it from like a journalism perspective, like, what are the news outlets or places that consumers go to read about wine? Where are they getting information? And so there are different platforms now than were then. And when I talk about wine writing, I talk about it from more of this marketing perspective. Like, and so in that way, it's like, what are the platforms that like producers, winemakers are using to tell their stories? And in a lot of ways today, those have kind of like all woven together, because there are more producers also using new platforms that historically were only for journalists that now they're co-opting. So I just wanted to draw that out. Like, when I talk about wine writing, I think about it in two different ways, and those have crossover. And so when you ask a question about wine writing and about platforms, I think in two different ways. So first, let's talk about wine writing as what we would traditionally call, I think, journalism. So there used to be like magazines and newspapers, and then the internet blew up and there was like, oh my gosh, like digital news. And another reason that I ultimately left editorial was because the magazines that I was working for and the newspapers that I was hoping to work for, those publications folded. It was 2008 and those went away. And so there's this huge shakeup in platforms and in the ways that people got media. Now, over those like 15, 20 years, there's been this like proliferation of new types of platforms. You mentioned Substack. That's my favorite. I publish on it. I love it. And I could talk for hours and hours, but I won't, about the ways that Substack has transformed wine writing or media as a whole, because of the way that people can get paid, and it lacks traditional advertiser financing. I think it allows for a huger diversity of voices. And I think we're moving back into this more wonderfully long form, what I call more like nutritious media instead of like junk food, snackable, like fast media that is like empty calories. So there's that.
I like that analogy.
Then God, I get so excited. I have so many things to say. Then we think about the marketing wine writing. And again, when I started and I was like looking for stories and trying to research stories and find information, like wineries didn't have websites. That wasn't a thing. They didn't have social media accounts. If I was lucky, a distributor, their importer, would have information about them. But that was like one very specific perspective of the story. It was told through a specific lens. It wasn't like direct from the mouth of the producer. And now producers have so many avenues for telling their stories. I think that the like lag is that most producers haven't caught up and aren't using those platforms the way that they could. So they're barely using their website. If they have their website, especially, you work with international producers, like Italian producers, like, let me use Google Translate and just like change the words I had. And like, I see that and I'm like, oh my God, this is like so immediately delegitimizing to read this copy from the producer that's like not telling the story that they want to. And then of course, social media. And then I think that there's more and more room for using platforms like Substack or also YouTube or, you know, a whole proliferation for marketers or producers to tell their story.
Right.
So long answer to your short question, but that is some of how wine rating has changed, I think was your question.
No, and I mean, the way that I would sum up some of what you said, which was all really interesting, I think, you know, we have seen proliferation of platforms in both sides, editorial, and I like this distinction, Steve, that you drew with wine writing, and we can use it throughout our conversation, is like we have editorial and wine writing for the New York Times or writing for your wine blog, or even if you're using Instagram to share content about wine, like that's editorial. And then the other piece, and which is content as a winery, your website, your social media. And I think, Stevie, you're so well positioned to really comment on both because you have a traditional editorial background from decades ago, but now you're focusing more on the content piece and the marketing side. But as I understand, you're also still penning, and I've read some great articles on your own Substack. So you're now wearing both hats on the editorial and the marketing side.
Yeah, I often say that I'm bilingual in that way. And I think
I love it.
It's exactly as you said, that unique background of like, I'm a storyteller at heart and I come from that editorial background. I know how to speak to guests in that way. And I know how to speak to guests because I was the retailer and I am the restaurateur who's like selling the bottles in the shop. But I also know from that same background that I'm looking for information from makers that I can use in my own storytelling. And I need those makers to tell their story to me in a compelling way. Or as the buyer, like literally the buyer, right? Like I'm buying the wine to sell to the consumers. As the buyer, I read it and I'm like, I don't know if I really like the wine can taste delicious, but you haven't told your story in a compelling way. So I'm not going to buy it. And I'm not going to sell it to my buyers who are ultimately your buyers. So I'm bilingual in that way. I know how to speak both languages. And I think that's like the joy. That's what I love about what I do right now is getting to do both of those.
And what do you think are some of the greatest challenges, let's say, you know, from the content piece when you're working with a winery to help them tell their story, let's say on their website, which is probably the most foundational piece of information they can have. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges in getting a winery to really tell their story in that authentic way?
What a great question. I've spent so much time thinking about this, and what I have discovered, and I think it really boils down to, is I don't think that many makers have really thought about why they do what they do. Like, what's their reason for being? And what's driving them, and getting that story out from them is the like really yummy, juicy bits that I think like infiltrate all of the rest of the storytelling that we do. But when I ask people that, if I'm sitting down with a winemaker, I'm like, why do you do what you do? They're like, what do you mean? I do like,
it's like asking them, why is the sky blue, right? Like they're
like, I like wine, or you know, a lot of producers in Europe are like, this is my family's place, and I'm like, great, tell me more about that.
I'm the 100th generation winemaker.
Yeah, and I'm like, tell me more. What does that mean to you? What do you feel like? You know, and really getting into that, like, again, I keep using these words like yummy, juicy, gooey bits of what really like drives people is, I think, the like heart of a story. And I think a lot of people know it, but they haven't thought about telling it. They've thought about, like, if, as I'm thinking aloud here in our conversation, they've thought about like, how have I seen people tell the story? Like, here, witness our vineyards, 100 generations on this soil. And it's like, yeah, so, and they tell that story in the same way that they've like seen it told elsewhere. And I think that gets into the like, this is such a bigger question, but like, why is wine feeling like kind of boring and inaccessible or exclusive to a lot of people right now? Like, those gooey bits aren't quite coming out. We're not allowing the vulnerability, the authenticity. There's like always an element of like fearfulness back there, like that's driving you. And like, I want to know that.
Right. Yeah. And I think like what you're getting at, Stevie, to me is like, before you even sit down to write your brand brochure, your boilerplate, like have some of those hard conversations with yourself or with your brand team or whoever's kind of running your brand about your reason for being. Like, it sounds like you need to, it's almost like go to a therapist and have these conversations,
I know.
right? And like
I
really
know.
sit in like a room without technology and screens and like do some soul searching maybe around who you are as a brand. Like what, treating the brand almost the same way you might explore your personal issues in a way, but really getting into that, to like you said, that juicy stuff, so that you're really saying something compelling and interesting and unique when you're telling your story.
And that, I will try to like say this in a concise and like tidy, nice way, but like that is what draws people to wine. Like I've had so many conversations with people about like, what, why do you love wine? And like when you really like you're you're sharing a bottle together and you start to like, wine draws out this like really deep, intimate, like, meaningful conversation among people in a way that I've never seen anything else do. And we start to have these like truly human interactions, this meaningful community building like conversation. And we start to share about our fears and our insecurities and our passions and our hopes. And like, that's what brings people to wine. And I think that like that needs to be woven into more of the like marketing strategy of wine. Like, wine doesn't have enough joy and enough fun and enough like love in it right now.
Right.
It's not drawing people in. And I think more and more audiences, especially in the world that we live in right now, and especially younger audiences, like they want that.
Yeah.
They want
absolutely.
that.
They want that juiciness. They want that realness. And I think like what you said in a way is wine inspires, they call it a social lubricant. It's one of these phrases I read or heard like 10 years ago, and I always use it, but it's a social lubricant, and that it does bring people together around food, around a table, around a party. It does inspire those deeper conversations. But as wine marketers, content creators, journalists, anyone working in the world of communicating around wine, we're not necessarily like almost taking our own advice. We're not ourselves utilizing those stories that wine might inspire in the way we're communicating about our brands.
Yes.
Yeah.
This, one of the pieces of the book, I'm kind of talking about the ways that like people are like, oh, but alcohol. And I'm like, but really like there's this element that's like, this is a little controversial, but like there's this element of wine that I love. It breaks down some of those like barriers that like we've put up to protect us in this crazy world. And like we choose to intentionally drink it because it like lowers those inhibitions. And I know like using that word, like lowering inhibitions, is like associated with like danger and like reckless behavior. But like it's also, when I say that in this moment, I mean like it's allowing us to soften those edges and to like pull down the fences that like we've built up that have made us like so fearful of one another. And really, again, those words vulnerability and authenticity sound so like, but that's what wine does. And I just have this profound conviction that like everybody wants more of that, wants more of that really meaningful connection. And wine does that. And so I try to write things that get into that.
Right. I love that. No, I love this whole conversation. I think it's so powerful, everything that you're saying, Stevie. I do love to give our listeners really practical advice as well. So we've had a great conversation about getting more vulnerable in your writing, really sharing that authenticity. How would you recommend a winery? Let's say someone who is sitting on the other side and listening to this and thinking, yeah, you know what, my website does kind of suck. It's kind of lame. I kind of copied off my competitor and just changed a few words, or I use ChatGPT. What do you recommend to a winery that might be listening to this? How do they even get started, like getting into that deeper, more vulnerable writing?
Call me.
Yeah, well, besides calling you, of course, I was going to say.
Besides calling me, don't use ChatGPT, okay? It's so evident when people use it. Again, my job is like culling materials for information to tell stories, and I can see it right away, and consumers can see it as well. So I would say trust your voice. Don't be afraid to be authentic and to be vulnerable. I tell people, honestly, most of what I do for clients is less writing for them and more copy editing. So I tell people like, just write it all, like just,
Yeah.
What's the verbal diarrhea? Like just put it all out there and write just as if you were speaking to me. Oftentimes with clients, I'll be like, let's just have a phone call and just talk to me about what you're doing and why. If I can go and visit them, even better, because I can see then like the ways that they interact and the excitement that they have. And I take everything that they say and then I just shape those words. But like, their individual voice is so powerful and delicious. And I think so many people have been taught like not to trust that. And I'm saying the opposite, like trust your voice, be authentic, write as you speak, be vulnerable, share like the goods and the bads, and then maybe call me so that I can help you spell and punctuate things properly. I would say really think about incorporating the like lifestyle and the joy of wine drinking instead of just your tech details into your writing. Add this into your tasting notes. You know, every single tasting note that I write, I try to advocate for not just like taste like this, pairs with this, but also with this occasion. Like, you know, what is the feeling of the wine? Like it feels like sitting outside on this kind of day, something that like makes it more about lifestyle.
Right.
Again, figure out why
for example,
you do.
I'm like, Lambrusco for me is Italian disco. I've just decided like Lambrusco is Italian disco. It's disco music. It's like disco balls. It's being outside on a terrace drinking a glass of Lambrusco, but it's Lambrusco disco. Like that's just how I've been thinking about the biggest brand that I work on, which most people here know. I don't even need to say it, but yeah, like that lifestyle again. Like what is the joy that wine is sparking and that feeling that it's kind of giving you?
Yeah. And I immediately am like, oh, great. And this sounds fun. And then I think of, you know, we sell a lot of Lambrusco. We sell so much Lambrusco at Mama. And I'm like, well, that Lambrusco is more like moody, like at the end of the night, after hours disco. And that one is like, as we're getting like kind of hype, but like people aren't there, but like we want to feel like safe.
Warm up.
But yeah, exactly. And then I said it before, but like figure out why you do what you do and tell your audience that. Like also don't doubt that there's other people just like you who care about the same things that you do. I really believe that people are inevitably drawn to that like personality and character and authenticity. And then I'll just, you know, I mentioned this a little bit, but like I actually have a brand development questionnaire that I send out to all of my clients and I will send it to anyone for free. I always send it out for free that if people decide to fill it out and send it back to me and be like, use that as our starting place for work, then great. But it asks those kinds of questions like, why do you exist or do what you do? Who do you most want to buy and love your product? Who are your comps? Or I put it another way, who are the people or brands that you most want to be like when you grow up, you know? And so there's like 20 different questions that just are the way that I think about when I'm writing. And so I was always asking these questions to people. And so I send that out to people and it gets them thinking and helps them understand more, which then again shapes, it's the filter through which all of the writing and all of the rest of not just your marketing, but like your entire brand strategy, like how you approach sales, how you decide new opportunities. Are we going to do this or not? Does it align with these things that we set or not?
Totally.
Yeah.
I love that. And I definitely want that questionnaire. So I was like, ask Stevie to send me a questionnaire and my notes. That I think is all super practical, great advice for anyone listening and thinking about how they can improve the content that's on their website in all their marketing materials. So I love those types of questions as well. They're just great brainstorm starters and thought starters. What do you think about the future of wine writing, Stevie? Like, is there anything new on the horizon that you foresee in terms of maybe, and you can maybe look at this from both hats, the editorial and the content side, but anything that you predict for the future? What's your crystal ball?
Well, my crystal ball is also a hopeful, wishful thinking crystal ball. So I also believe very powerfully in energy and intention. And if I say that I want it, you know, it will happen. So I want it to happen, and I think it will happen, that there will be just a lot more joy and more fun in wine writing, that it will be more about positive messages, like who's doing what that's inspiring and hopeful. And again, I think both on an editorial side, like there will be more of these stories that are told. More people want to read those. And I think inevitably then that will drive producers and marketers to tell those.
Yeah.
And I guess along with that, again, I told you kind of in the before show that I'm coming off of 6 days of this incredible Napa Rise Climate and Wine Symposium. And the stories of regeneration, not just directly related to climate, but as a whole that came out of that are so inspiring. And I really think that more of these stories are going to be told.
Yeah, amazing. I like that future. It sounds interesting, and to use your phrase, juicy and gummy and deep.
And joyful.
And joyful.
Don't we all want so much more joy right now?
Yes,
like,
I think
who
so.
doesn't want more joy?
Absolutely.
You have 2 headlines to click on: joy or not more joy. Like, joy.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. We all need it. Stevie, as we wind down, and I think we could talk for like 2 more hours, but we do need to wind down this episode. We'll do our little rapid fire quiz that we do at the end of every episode. If you can do your best to answer these questions in just a couple sentences. So question number 1, what is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
Words matter, and you should choose them as intentionally as you make your winemaking decisions.
Absolutely. Great advice. Number 2, what is something you might have told your younger self about wine writing and selling wine and working in the wine industry?
Everybody wants more joy in their life. Sell joy.
Sell joy. I love that. And finally, any favorite travel hacks for us in this industry that tend to travel quite a bit?
Yeah, I think, mine is I don't sell wine when I travel. I buy it. And often I'm gifted bottles.
Yeah.
And there's so now I just know that I always bring a bigger suitcase than I need. And I pack boots so that they can act as padding, for which I can insulate and basically I shove all the bottles into the boots on my return trip home.
I actually do that at home for my tall boots, as I use empty wine bottles to keep them in shape. So,
oh my God.
I love that tip.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I never thought about that.
Oh yeah, lots of ways to recycle all that wine and wine boxes, wine crates, the wooden ones I love too. So I found a million ways to use those. Well, Stevie, thank you again for joining me. This was awesome. How can our listeners follow along with you?
So I mentioned my Substack, which is resilientwine.substack.com. So just think about how we all want to be more resilient and have more resiliency, and you'll remember that. So resilientwine.substack.com. My personal website is steviestacionis.com, which is a lot of S's and complicated spelling. So harder to remember, but steviestacionis.com. And I'm also with that same handle on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. Twitter is not a thing anymore. And I'm not on whatever it has become. I am on Instagram at Stevie Stacionis.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Stevie, for being here and for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope we can run together soon.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you've enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.